Hey, I'm Zach, and yeah, that code right there is probably what you're looking for. That's the code you need in order to be able to use command line to render out a Blender sequence. So in this case, all I need to do now, this particular file is what I have right here. So I can right click it, run it as administrator, and say yes, and it will render out my sequence. So while it's doing that, if you came here to actually learn how to do that and how to adjust it on your own and want me to explain it, stick around. So here we go. So while it's rendering, and this will actually be done before I'm done, the important parts of this code is this first part here, and this is in just a normal TextPad file. So let's say I open up a new one here. New text document. Let's call it test, because that's a great name for things, as long as I remember what it was. So let me make it smaller. I'm just going to be copying and pasting. So the CD portion at the top refers to where is your Blender installed. So in this case, I'm going to right click on this Blender file here, or the shortcut, go to properties, and find out it's right there, this Blender Launcher EXE. But we don't need to point it clear to the launcher. We want to keep it nice and just to the folder, which means cutting it off here. So what I'm going to do is highlight there and copy. So now I have the extension. If I use that extension, then I would be able to actually go to where it's installed. So now that I've copied that, we'll just go and recreate things down here. So we're going to go and paste it here. And then we'll clean off this quotation and make it match what's above with CD followed by the location of your Blender install. So with this part here, then if I just go to the bottom here, and I'm just going to go down 2 lines to make it easier to read. You can just go down 1 and type in Blender. If I run this right now, after saving it of course, it won't run because it's a text file. So let's cover that next. So I'm going to close this one here and this .text file here. If I double click on this right now, it'll just open up like a text file. However, we want it to be a bat file. And the way we do that is you're going to want to change the extension. If you can't see the extensions there, you'll want to, I don't remember exactly the process for it, but you'll want to search on the internet something like how to make Windows display extension or display file extensions, and that should tell you what menu it's from. But so in this case, I typed in .bat, and I'm gonna hit enter. It's gonna be like, hey, do you know what you're doing? And the answer in this case is yes, I do. And then you'll notice the symbol changes, because if I was to double click on this, it's gonna start a Blender. Look at that. There we go. So it works so far. Always good to test along the way. So I'm going to close it. But so now if I try to click on that, I can't edit it anymore. At least not by double clicking, because it's not a text document. But if I right click it and tell it to edit, then I can edit it again. So our next step is the pointing it to this part here, which in this case is the location of my blend file. And you may be like, oh, that is a pain. I have to track down where it is. Well, in my case, my blend file here, if I right click with Shift held, so I'm holding down Shift and then I right click and then I release both, this copy as path option shows up. And if I copy as path, then when I go here and paste, it will paste the path of it with the quotations, which is what we want in this case. I'm going to add a space there. Now you notice up here there are 2 other criteria. There's this -B, which makes it so that it does not open up the Blender GUI window. It just does the command line. And the reason I like to use that part is I like to think I'm trying to squeeze every ounce of power out of my CPU and graphics card. So if it has to do anything more than necessary, I feel like it's slowing me down. Whether that's really the case, I don't know enough about computers to know, but that's what I stick with. Plus, I don't need to see the images coming out. Especially in my case, I run them out as an image sequence, and I don't need that. But then the next part is I want to render the animation, which is -A. So then I'm going to save it, and then this would run what we just did. So what I'm going to do is clear out our rendered frame so far. just because I had turned off overwrite in Blender. I'll get into that in a second. So this test.bat. So a thing to note is I have this render thing I made here previously for this tutorial. That's what we're viewing up top here. But the test one, it's not in the same file location. And that's okay because you're giving it the path so it knows what to do. So we're going to run this test file and let it go. So as it's doing this, let me just tell you a couple other things. So if you're asking, how do I know what that -b does? How do I know what that -a or that -a does? The answer is there's this thing called the Blender Manual. And what it is, it's an online tool that I'll put a link down in the description for, that it is a little bit dense, but it tells you a lot of great details if you know what you're looking for. So in this case, I was able to go through there and determine, based off of the notes, it's kind of like a specialized Wikipedia entry specifically for different Blender operations. If you're dealing with any other Blender operations that you don't know what it does, then that's the way where to look. Because it just has explanations about each one of the different operations in a modifier or a shader. So let's actually jump into Blender to show you the other thing, which is some of the caveats and things I've run into as issues. Hopefully this will help with any troubleshooting. So this is my Pixel Tank thing, my animation, my project thing. It's me making a pixelated looking tank and rendering out, or not rendering, but duplicating it many times. But the main thing I want to pay attention to is over here. Specifically in my render settings, that's something that really you can use EV or cycles. This particular, using the command line, it does not care. There are certain functions that are covered in the Blender manual that you can use that are only cycles or only EV. I tend not to use them. You can also on the command line part of this, you can even specify what frames you're rendering. However, the way I prefer to do it is to just set my project to be that way. So that way it's less in between things. So for example, here's something that's a little bit of a pitfall. Sometimes I will lower the resolution percentage, the resolution scale, when I'm doing test renders along the way, because I'm like, I don't actually need a full resolution file when I'm just trying to see if the color turned out right. So it's something like, if I'm like, cool, I want to render, it's like, that's great, but I don't need it to be my full 1080 1920. I can have it be 50% of that, which makes it render faster because I don't actually need it. But in this case, what you'll find out, or I'll show you, is that if I look at the outputs, these will not have outputted at the full size. They'll output at that 50% value. So let's see, details might have it. Yeah, there we go. That 960 by 540. So not the same 1920 by 1080. In this case, 50% of it. And that's something to know. So with those settings that you might do along the way to help yourself, is that you got to remember that the computer, unless you tell it otherwise, won't ignore those things. It will continue that. So if I was trying to bring this back to normal, I would bring it back up to 100. Then other things, frame range. So this right here, that will affect the frames you're rendering in this case. You can set this really high if you want. It could be like 300 frames. You can also set it down here in the timeline between the start and end frames. But whatever those numbers are is going to be when you tell it to render the full animation. Again, different if you were to specify the frames, but in this case, if you were to say the full animation, then it will change it. So in this case, let's say I change this to 2. So now it's only going to try to render again. This one right here and this one right here match. I didn't need to match it, does it automatically. Now if I was trying to do render animation, because this is the same thing that I'm doing on that command line. So let's go back to that command line. I'll clear out the exports and we'll run it again. The reason I'm clearing out the exports is because I have overwrite turned off. I'll get to that in just a second. Let me close this and save it. That's the other important thing, saving things, because if you don't save it and it tries to grab the file, then it's not going to know what to do. So let's keep using our test file here. We're going to open it. And so what we'll do is I'll go into our output folder where we should see 2 different frames pop out. Now, this one should be doing these 2 frames, but again, we changed it to 100% now, so it's only doing 2 frames because that's the duration that we set, the start and end, but we did up it back to 100%, so these should be 1080 by 1920. So let's go take a look at that. Actually, it tells me right now I was hovering over that. Look at that. So it is at the resolution we were looking for. Another handy thing about this file is it does close itself once it's done. Alright, so a couple more things now that we're here. Again, really what this command line thing is doing, it is as if you opened up your render here, you opened up your project, went to render, and hit render animation. It's the same thing. So if your project file isn't set up to be able to just click on that yet, then you're going to give yourself errors when you run into trying to do the command line. So make sure you're set up as if you were going to run it yourself. So in this case, that also means setting an output. I've already done that. You can also set a name with the output besides just the folder. I just set the folder. My particular settings is I like to throw on compression high. I like to make sure it's just RGB. I don't need the alpha channel. And I like it to be in color, not black and white. Color depth, I'm just learning. It doesn't matter to me. But that's 8-bit color versus 16-bit color. And this is this overwrite thing that I mentioned. If you check that box, what's going to happen is every time you try to render the whole animation, it'll start from the beginning, overwriting files along the way, which can be fine in some cases, but I just don't like destructive things like that. I like, especially because I could forget it's there, I like having that off, so that way it won't overwrite it. And another benefit of this is, let's say you just need to update, like, I don't know, let's say the last 10 frames of a project, which is definitely something I'm doing, because I forgot one thing. I can go in there and update my project, save my project, and then when I tell it to render, if I've deleted those frames from my folder, then it will make it so that it will just do those frames. Another thing, while we're on the output thing, is that people output different ways. There are many file formats. If you want to go right into video, some people use that FFmpeg video. The reason I don't like it personally is I am afraid something's going to go wrong along the way. And this puts it all in one video. And if, let's say, your computer was to crash, power was interrupted, you're starting back from the beginning again. What I like about the PNG, while I'm sure there's higher quality formats that are one of these, PNG can preserve transparency if I'm ever doing that. And otherwise, just easy enough to work with. I end up taking then all of my images afterwards, putting them in a video sequence to make an animation. So it's an extra step, but it is the reason I do image sequences, and that's why you'll hear me mentioning that, even though you could just go directly to video. Alright, so that's all I'm going to go through with the output settings. But now here's one more fun thing to tell you about, and actually which is how we're going to end this video. Is there's another command. So this is being used in command prompt, and with it being used in command prompt, you can do a lot of things to your computer. On one hand, be careful. You could definitely cause serious harm to your computer if you're putting the wrong bits of code in there. If you're typing gibberish, it's not going to kill it. But if you put the wrong bits of code, you could trigger operations that are able to run pretty serious commands on your computer. Because of that, things have to be often run in administrator mode. So they have 2 bat files here. One is my render and one is my render shutdown. So I'm going to go into edit this render shutdown to show you what I have in there. These are both identical except for this last command. Shutdown and then space and then -s. And what that does is that issues the command of the computer to shut down. I believe that -s is to shut down regardless of if anything is like up or anything. Like if you still have your emails up, sometimes your computer will be like, oh, you're still using it, we're not going to do anything. but you do want it to shut down. And this will run in this order. It won't try to shut down midway through your Blender render. It'll do it once this Blender command is complete. So what it would look like, and this will actually, I'm not going to run this because I know once I start running this and it hits that shutdown thing, I'll have about a minute before it shuts down the whole computer. And I don't think I can save everything fast enough. And I don't know the command prompt code to cancel that. So, this, just know what you're playing with. But the reason that this shutdown command is really useful to me is I like to render overnight. But I also don't like the idea of my computer just idling half the night if I'm not using it. So the idea with this is that way I can put it on there and I'm able to render it, and then once it's done, it will shut itself down, which is really useful for me. And while we're on the idea of how to use overnight time, here's another thing you can do. And I will close this. Well, actually, no. Let's put it on. No, I'll close this one. We'll go do it up here. Is this Blender part of this right here? There is nothing to say. You can't call it multiple times. And render out multiple times for multiple purposes. Let's say we want a V5, which I know doesn't exist, but we're going to make it exist in just a second. So if I copy paste, let's do this. So if I, let's say, have a V4 and a V5, or I know for me, I've been trying to compare Eevee to Cycles quite a bit so I can better understand them. I'm going to pop this file open just so I can change its render settings. Is I've been comparing Eevee to Cycles, so let's just do that same thing. I'm going to go up here, change it to Eevee, and save it. Actually, I need to change where I'm exporting to, because otherwise it's not going to do anything. So I'm going to go into my files and outputs, and I currently just have an output folder. And with great naming parameters, I'm going to call it output 2, just to make things confusing. But bear with me. So to review, what we have done now, after I save this, is so we have queued up a command, and I'll actually close this too so I can run this when we're talking. So what we have queued up right now is, and I will start running right now. Well, I'll run an administrator, why not? Is we have two different blend sequences that are going to render. We have our first one, our V4, which is our one we've been working with this whole time, that's doing 2 frames in Cycles. Then we duplicated it and made a V5 that we decided, or I guess I decided, to render in Eevee, which is definitely going to render faster, but it'd go into a different folder. So they're 2 different tasks. But the reason this is important is because this means that you can render multiple projects overnight and then shut it down. And that's kind of that's the wild part about this, is that this makes it so that, let's say you do multiple projects during a day, it's not one of those, oh, well, this one's only 30 frames long, I'm going to run it, and then I have to get up in 4 hours to start the next one, or have to start the next one the next day. This is able to enable you to be able to render overnight if you like. So again, here's our 2 images there in our output folder, and our output 2 folder, 2 images there. I'm going to open these up just so you get a visual comparison of Eevee versus Cycles. There are probably ways I could have made this better, but just that's not the point of the tutorial. The point of the tutorial is to understand how to use these bat files. So there you go. They're different. We've got the on the right we have Eevee, on the left we have Cycles. On the left is our V4, on the right is our V5. So yeah, so that's how you do it. There are many other commands you can learn and build into this and be able to make this code possibly even run cleaner. I believe there might be a way to actually do, rather than calling the word Blender twice, I might be able to just put multiple in a sequence. But I haven't learned that yet. So if anybody figures that out, just throw it in the comments and I'll add it into the description for people, or I think I'm able to favorite a comment or something. Still working on that YouTube thing. But anyway, hope this helps. Hope this helps at least give you some confidence as you start to dive into doing command line things. The last thing I'll leave you with is, especially with the shutdown command, is you definitely need to run it as administrator. If you just double click on the bat file with the shutdown one, since the shutdown is a powerful command compared to the ones with Blender, which is more of a everyday program, the shutdown command, if you're not running it as an admin, so right clicking and clicking run as an admin compared to just double clicking on it, if you don't run it as an administrator, then it might not work. At least the shutdown portion might not work. The normal render should work just fine. So yeah, I guess, and one more thing I'll tell you, because I just keep adding on things. So you see this part up here where it says where the location of your Blender location is? If you update Blender, this is going to change, and your code's going to break. And that's fine, because most of the time you can just simply just be like, oh, I'm in 4.1 now, and then you're better. But it's always good practice. So once you install it again, if you do run into an error, just to recopy that path again. Yeah, so hopefully this helps. Hopefully it gets the balls rolling to be able to enable you to render overnight or when you're away from your computer and do it in the most efficient way you can.